Agnes Weinrich. Agnes Weinrich, 1873, May 3, 1946, was one of the first American artists to make works of art that were modernist, abstract, and influenced by the Cubist style. She was also an energetic and effective proponent of modernist art in America, joining with like-minded others to promote experimentation as an alternative to the generally conservative art of their time. Life and work. Early years. Agnes Weinrich was born in 1873 on a prosperous farm in southeast Iowa. Both her father and mother were German immigrants, and German was the language spoken at home. Following her mother's death in 1879, she was raised by her father, Christian Weinrich. In 1894, at the age of 59, he retired from farming and moved his household, including his three youngest children, Christian Jr. 24, Agnes 21, and Lena 17, to nearby Burlington, Iowa, where Agnes attended the Burlington Collegiate Institute, from which she graduated in 1897. Christian took Agnes and Lena with him on a trip to Germany in 1899 to re-establish links with their German relatives. When he returned home later that year, he left the two women in Berlin with some of these relatives, and when, soon after his return, he died, they inherited sufficient wealth to live independently for the rest of their lives. Either before or during their trip to Germany, Lena had decided to become a musician, and while in Berlin studied piano at the Stern Conservatory. On her part, Agnes had determined to be an artist and began studies toward that end at the same time. In 1904, the two returned from Berlin and settled for 2 years. At this time, Lena changed her name to Helen. In 1905, they moved to Chicago, where Agnes studied at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago under John Vanderpoel, Nellie Walker, and others. In 1909, Agnes and Helen returned to Berlin and traveled from there to Munich, where Agnes studied briefly under Julius Exter, and on to Rome, Florence, and Venice before returning to Chicago. They traveled to Europe for the third and last time in 1913, spending a year in Paris. There, they made friends with American artists and musicians who had gathered there around the local art scene. Throughout this period, the work Agnes produced was skillful but unoriginal drawings, etching, and paintings in the dominant academic and impressionist styles. On her return from Europe in 1914, she continued to study art during the warm months of the year in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where she was a member of the Provincetown Printers' Art Colony in Massachusetts, and during the colder ones in New York City. In Provincetown, she attended classes at Charles Hawthorne's Cape Cod School of Art and in New York, the Art Students League. Hawthorne and other artists established the Provincetown Art Association in 1914 and held the first of many juried exhibitions the following year. Weinrich contributed 9 pictures to this show, all of them representational and somewhat conservative in style. A pencil sketch made about 1915 shows a figure, probably one of the Portuguese women of Provincetown. Weinrich was a meticulous draftsperson, and this drawing is typical of the work she did in the academic style between 1914 and 1920. She also produced works more akin to the Impressionist favored by Hawthorne and many of his students. When in 1917 Weinrich showed paintings in a New York women's club, the MacDowell Club, the art critic for the Brooklyn Daily Eagle said they showed a strong note of Impressionism. In 1916, Weinrich joined a group of printmakers which had begun using the white line technique pioneered by Provincetown artist B.J.O. Nordfeldt. She and the others in the group, including Blanche Lazelle, Ethel Mars, and Edna Boyce Hopkins, worked together, exchanging ideas and solving problems. A year later, Weinrich showed one of her first white line prints at an exhibition held by the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. Broken Fence in its 2 states, the print and the woodblock from which she made it, show Weinrich to be moving away from realistic presentation towards a style which, while neither abstract nor cubist, brings the viewer's attention to the flat surface plane of the work with its juxtaposed shapes and blocks of contrasting colors. When in 1920 the informal White Line Printmakers Group organized its own exhibition, Weinrich showed a dozen works, including one called Cows Grazing in the Dunes near Provincetown. This print shows greater tendency to abstraction than either Broken Fence or the prints made by other Provincetown artists of the time. The cows and dunes are recognizable but not presented realistically. The white lines serve to emphasize the blocks of muted colors, which are the print's main pictorial elements. Weinrich uses the texture of the wood surface to call attention to the two-dimensional plane, the paper, on which she made the print, in contrast with the implicit depth of foreground and background of cows, dunes, and sky. While the work is not Cubist, it has a proto-Cubist feel in a way that is similar to some of the more abstract paintings of Paul Cézanne. By 1919 or 1920, while still spending winters in Manhattan and summers on Cape Cod, the sisters came to consider Provincetown their formal place of residence. By that time they had also met the painter, Karl Naths. Like themselves, a Midwesterner of German origin who had grown up in a household where German was spoken, he settled in Provincetown in 1919. Agnes and Naths shared artistic leanings and mutually influenced each other's increasing use of abstraction in their work. The sisters and Naths became close companions. In 1922, Naths married Helen and moved into the house which the sisters had rented. He was then 31, Helen 46, and Agnes 49 years old. When, 2 years later, the three decided to become year-round residents of Provincetown, Agnes and Helen used a part of their inheritance to buy land and materials for constructing a house and outbuildings for the three of them to share. Naths himself acquired disused structures nearby as sources of lumber, and, having once been employed as a set building for a theater company, he was able to build their new home. Weinrich was somewhat in advance of Naths in adopting a modernist style. She had seen avant-garde art while in Paris and met American artists who had begun to appreciate it. On her return to the United States, she continued to discuss new theories and techniques with artists in New York and Provincetown, some of whom she had met in Paris. This loosely knit group influenced one another as their individual styles evolved. In addition to Blanche Lazelle, already mentioned, the group included Maud Squires, William Zorach, Oliver Chaffee, and Ambrose Webster. Some of them, including Lazelle and Flora Schofield, had studied with influential modernists in Paris, and most had read and discussed the influential Cubist and Futurist writings of Albert Gleizes and Gino Severini. Mature style. Two of Weinrich's paintings, both produced about 1920, mark the emergence of her mature style. The first, Woman with Flowers, is similar to one by the French artist Jean Metzinger titled Le Gouter Tea Time 1911. Like much of Metzinger's work, Le Gouter was discussed in books and journals of the time, including the book Du Cubisme, co-authored by Metzinger and Albert Gleizes. Because the group with which Weinrich associated read about and discussed avant-garde art in general and Cubism in particular, it is reasonably likely that Weinrich was familiar with Metzinger's work before she began her own. The second painting, Red Houses, bears general similarity to Landscapes by Cézanne and Braque. Both paintings are Cubist in style. However, with them Weinrich did not announce an abrupt conversion to Cubism, but rather marked a turning toward greater experimentation. In her later work she would not adopt a single style or stylistic tendency, but would produce both representative pictures and ones that were entirely abstract, always showing a strong sense of the two-dimensional plane of the picture's surface. After she made these two paintings, neither her subject matter nor the media she used would dramatically change. She continued to employ subjects available to her in her Provincetown studio and the surrounding area to produce still lifes, village and pastoral scenes, portraits and abstractions in oil on canvas and board watercolor, pastel, crayon and graphite on paper, and woodblock prints. Possessing an outgoing and engaging personality and an active, vigorous approach to life, Weinrich promoted her own work while also helping Karl Naths to develop relationships with potential patrons, gallery owners, and people responsible for organizing exhibitions. With him, she put herself in the forefront of an informal movement toward experimentation, since, because of her independent means, she was not constrained to make her living by selling art. She was free to use exhibitions and her many contacts with artists and collectors to advance appreciation and understanding of works which did not conform to the still conservative norm of the 1920s and 1930s. Early in the 1920s, critics began to take notice of her work, recognizing her departure from the realism then prevailing in galleries and exhibitions. Paintings that she showed in 1922 drew the somewhat dry characterization of individualistic, and in 1923 her work drew praise from a critic as abstract, but at the same time not without emotion. In 1925, Weinrich became a founding member of the New York Society of Women Artists. Other Provincetown members included Blanche Lazelle, Ellen Ravenscroft, Lucy Ellingall, and Marguerite Sorech. The membership was limited to 30 painters and sculptors, all of whom could participate in the group's exhibitions, each getting the same space. The group provided a platform for their members to distinguish themselves from the genteel and traditionalist art that women artists were at that time expected to show, and, by the account of a few critics, it appears their exhibitions achieved this goal. In 1926, Weinrich joined with Naths and other local artists in a rebellion against the traditional group that had dominated the Provincetown Art Association. For the next decade, 1927 through 1937, the association would mount two separate annual exhibitions, the one conservative in orientation and the other experimental, or, as it was said, radical. Both Weinrich and Naths participated on the jury that selected works for the first modernist exhibition. Weinrich's painting, Still Life, made about 1926, may have been shown in the 1927 show. Representative of some aspects of her mature style, it is modernist but does not show Cubist influence. The objects pictured are entirely recognizable, but treated abstractly. Although foreign background are distinguishable, the objects as colored forms make an interesting and visually satisfying surface design. In 1930, Weinrich put together a group show for modernists at the GRD Gallery in New York. The occasion was the first time a group of Provincetown artists exhibited together in New York. For it she selected works by Naths, Charles Demuth, Oliver Chaffee, Marguerite and William Zorach, Jack Tuikov, Janice Biela, Niles Spencer, E. Ambrose Webster, and others. Later years. Weinrich turned 60 on July 16, 1933. Although she had led a full and productive life devoted to development of her own art and to the advancement of modernism in art, she did not cease to work toward both objectives. She continued to work in oil on canvas and board, pastel and crayon on paper, and woodblock printing. Her output continued to vary in subject matter and treatment. For example, Still Life with Leaves, circa 1930, oil on canvas, 18 × 24 inches, contains panels of contrasting colors with outlining similar to Naths' style. Movement in C minor, circa 1932, oil on board, 9 × 12 inches, is entirely abstract. It too relates to Naths' work, both in treatment again, outline panels of contrasting colors, and in its apparent relationship to music, something in which Naths was also interested. Fish Shacks, circa 1936, monochrome woodblock print, is severely abstract and has a strong Cubist feel. Untitled Abstraction, circa 1938, oil on canvas board, 12.25 × 12 inches, is very different from the abstract work of the earlier 1930s. It is a geometric abstraction showing influence of Wassily Kandinsky, consisting of rectilinear color panels in cool tones with two contrasting panels in ochre and red. Floral Still Life, circa 1940, crayon on paper, 7 × 9.5 inches, contains a frame within a frame, emphasizing the surface plane dramatically, and is also entirely abstract. Its composition consists of star-like shapes in blue and magenta, in a lively pattern against a dark, textured background. Critical reception. Despite the quality of her work and despite the energy and skill with which she worked both to develop her own talent and to further the progressive movement in American art, Weinrich received little recognition during her lifetime and has not received much more since her death. Most accounts of her life and work repeat a few salient facts. They do not provide citations and some of their claims cannot be confirmed. Only one person, Louise R. Noun, studied her in detail. See the exhibition catalog she co-wrote and the article by her, both cited in the further reading section below. There is no evidence that Weinrich was ever represented by a commercial gallery, and it is likely that she made her sales via exhibitions and out of her studio. She did not usually provide date, name, place, or subject on her works and kept few records of what she produced. For these reasons, and because 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 they were not inventoried by art dealers in her lifetime and she made a lot of art that was not sold. There is often doubt about the provenance of any given piece. Exhibitions. This is a selective list of exhibitions in which she participated during her life. Its main source is Louise Noun's article on Weinrich in Woman's Art Journal, supplemented by contemporary news accounts in the New York Times, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, the New York Evening Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Christian Science Monitor. 1915 onward, Provincetown Art Association. 1917, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. 1917, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Philadelphia. 1917-23, Society of Independent Artists, New York. 1919, Art Institute of Chicago, Ho. 1920, Boston Arts Club. 1926 onward, New York Society of Women Artists and Artists. 1928, Grace Horn Gallery, Boston. 1929, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Philadelphia. 1932, Boston Public Library. 1936, Harley Perkins Gallery, Boston Solo. 1938, Boston Society of Independent Artists. 1938, Washington Public Library, Washington, D.C. 1939, Corcoran Gallery Biennial, Washington, D.C. 1939, Fogg Art Museum 20th Century Club, Boston. 1939, Witherstein Gallery, Boston. 1939, Institute of Modern Art, Boston. 1945, Waljeska Gallery, Brooklyn, New York.